On the 30th of April 2025, the President signed Statutory Instrument No. 22 establishing a Cost Efficiency Incentive, or CEI, framework for Nigeria's upstream petroleum operations. The order links measurable cost-saving performance to a terrain-agnostic tax credit mechanism and, well, it's effective until the 31st of May 2035. This note distills the regulatory requirements, external commentary and strategic consequences for Sahara Group's upstream portfolio. Executive summary. The policy thrust here is to reward verifiable reductions in unit operating cost, or UOC, through tax credits capped at 20% of annual tax liability. There's a window of opportunity, a 10-year incentive period, and, unutilized credits will lapse after 3 years or by the 31st of May 2035. Some key moving parts are still awaited, a new PRC and first implementation guidelines, which are statutorily due 30 days after the 30th of April, but well, they're still in draft. The immediate imperative for Sahara is to baseline our current UOC by terrain, simulate CEI outcomes, and really embed cost discipline levers within the fiscal year 25 budget refresh. Intent and strategic objectives of the order. The order pursues 5 intertwined aims. First, cut Nigeria's upstream cost per barrel to competitive quartiles. Second, institutionalize cost discipline among lessees, licensees and contractors. Third, shorten contracting and project execution cycles. Fourth, maximize net economic value for the Federation. And finally, incentivize operators via tax credits rather than headline rate reductions. Scope, spectrum and areas of application. So who does this apply to? All upstream lessees, licensees and their contractors, PSCs, JVs and sole risk. What's covered? Operating expenditure or OPEX only. Capital spend is excluded. Where? Onshore, shallow water and deep offshore terrains, each with separate annual benchmarks. And when? Well, cost performance is measured on a fiscal year basis, aligned to each taxpayer's return cycle. Performance evaluation, monitoring and benchmarking rules, benchmark setting, new PRC to publish annual terrain-specific target operating costs, or TOC, after stakeholder consultation and methodology disclosure. Metric UOC equals OPEX divided by fiscal sales volumes measured in barrels or barrels of oil equivalent. Verification, production and lifting volumes reconciled to eliminate underlift or overlift distortions. So publication means that the list of qualifying companies will be uploaded to the NUPRC web portal before the tax return deadline. Now, let's talk a bit about the computation of the CI and tax credit formulae. The CEI is calculated as CS times RTR times 50%, or alternatively, CEI equals open bracket, TOC minus AOC, close bracket times V times RTR times 50%. Credit utilization constraints are pretty important here. You may offset less than or equal to 20% of the asset's tax liability in any year. The credit must be applied within 3 years of issuance, otherwise it's forfeited. And just to note, the ceiling for any 1 year equals 50% of the government's incremental share. All right, let's talk about conditions precedent and subsequent. Before making a claim, you need to submit audited operating expenditure by each cost line, and also certify that your cost reduction strategy doesn't involve any harmful or prejudicial practices. This involves the asset finance, operations and commercial functions. Then the new PRC confirms the unit operating cost is within benchmark and forwards the eligible list to the FIRS and the Minister, with both NUPRC and FIRS involved at this stage. Now, in the claim year, you have to file your CEI computation in your tax return, and remember, you should cap your claim at 20% of the tax due. That's all part of tax and statutory reporting. After the claim, you need to retain supporting schedules for a 6-year statute period, and just so you know, FIRS may re-benchmark the unit operating cost. This falls under the tax audit desk. If you fail to satisfy any stage, the credit is disqualified, and honestly, you could end up facing back tax plus interest. Now, let's look at some ambiguities, concerns, and, well, areas that need clarification. First up, the definition of unit operating cost. Does it actually include security costs, decommissioning accruals, or operator overhead recharges? KPMG, for example, has noted inconsistencies between fiscal and operational treatment of unit operating cost. Second, the interaction with PIA regime's hydrocarbon tax applies to production sharing contract assets, while companies' income tax applies to incorporated joint ventures. So how exactly will the return to revenue be standardized? And third, the treatment of shared facilities cost-sharing agreements might blur the asset-level operating expenditure lines. Moving on, let's touch on the timing gap and expiry cliff edge. Fourth, there's a timing gap since the guidelines are overdue and, really, the uncertainty could stall fiscal year 2025 tax planning. Fifth, there's overlap with decarbonization requirements with forthcoming low-carbon benchmarks that could, alter the unit operating cost composition. And finally, the expiry cliff edge credits issued close to May 2035 risk having only a minimal utilization period. Other commentaries and chance remarks, well, they really add some extra perspective here. Some professionals, through their alerts and review commentaries, echo support for the CEI, but, they urge for tiered credit bands of 5 to 20% and capital efficiency metrics. For further details, you might want to check the recent EY tax news on Nigeria's cost-efficiency tax incentives for the oil and gas upstream petroleum sector. Meanwhile, Pengasan has raised concerns about labour cost suppression and, understandably, demands social safeguards. You'll find coverage of this in This Day Live's report on the executive order affecting upstream oil sector operations. On another front, energy transition advocates are calling for the integration of methane reduction KPIs, aiming to align with Nigeria's net zero trajectory. There's a useful reference in the Abuja Energy Reforms Framework from May 2025 titled Putting Every Barrel to Work. Now, moving on to the action plan and strategy for Sahara Group. So, in the immediate term, that's less than or equal to 90 days, the group should establish a cross-functional CEI task force and map OPEX drivers per asset. Next, reforecast the unit operating cost for fiscal year 2025 using draft benchmarks and, of course, simulate potential credit. It's also essential to engage with NUPRC and FERS, submitting a position paper on unit operating cost definition security and shared general and administrative costs. The CFO and VP Upstream Finance should aim to complete this by 31st August 2025. For the medium term, covering fiscal years 2025 to 2027, the plan is to embed digital oil field solutions like AI-driven predictive maintenance and remote surveillance to drive at least a 10% reduction in unit operating cost. There's also the need to renegotiate high-cost service contracts and incorporate performance-linked fee triggers. Another key step is to integrate low-carbon initiatives such as flare gas recovery and solar hybrid power to lower energy OPEX and align with the UPDT. The COO, supply chain and sustainability teams should target Q4 of 2026 for these actions. Looking at the long run, from fiscal year 2028 to 35, the goal is to target top quartile global cost per barrel of oil equivalent and reinvest tax credit savings into brownfield debottlenecking. The group should also evaluate mergers and acquisitions or a farm-in of low-cost barrels to diversify the terrain mix. Finally, there's the need to lobby for extension or conversion of the CEI into a combined OPEX and CAPEX efficiency regime with a strategy and regulatory affairs review by 2030. Recommendations. Well, first things first. It's vital to fast-track a baseline study to quantify our starting gap versus the forthcoming benchmarks. On advocacy, the stance should be to push for explicit exclusion of uncontrollable costs like security premiums and petrol subsidy differentials from the unit operating cost. For internal policy alignment, update the procurement and contracting manual to enforce cost tracking right down to the work order level. In terms of tax planning, build a CEI utilization schedule into the group's cash tax forecasting model, and, where permissible, explore grouping credits within a consolidated filing structure. For governance, embed CI KPIs into senior leadership scorecards and annual bonus gateways. The CEI framework offers Sahara Group a tangible, time-bound lever to convert disciplined cost management into direct tax savings while enhancing barrel profitability. By acting early, sharpening cost visibility, digitalizing field operations, and shaping the guideline dialogue, we can secure first-mover advantage, improve free cash flow, and reinforce shareholder confidence, all without compromising ESG commitments. A decisive, coordinated response is therefore endorsed.